What's up, everybody? Nate here, and the Federal Reserve is gearing up to raise its benchmark interest rates for the fourth straight time this week. The Federal Reserve back in June 2022 raised their benchmark interest rates by 0.75%, the most that they've done that since 1994. And more than likely, during their next FOMC meeting, which takes place this Tuesday and Wednesday, they are poised to raise them again. Now, a lot of experts and investors have been talking about the Federal Reserve lately, and they've been saying that the Fed is finally starting to get aggressive on inflation, and that by raising their benchmark interest rates, this might ultimately bring inflation down. However, Federal Reserve Chairman and the Federal Reserve themselves does not believe that raising their benchmark interest rates is actually going to fix our inflation problem. And today we're going to talk about what could be coming next with inflation and our economy in general, because if the Federal Reserve continues to get more aggressive on inflation, well, that could mean some disastrous consequences for our economy in the future and could potentially cause a recession. So what you need to understand about the Federal Reserve is they control a lot of the monetary policy in the United States. So when it comes to demand and how much people are able to spend and how easy people can get money, well, the Federal Reserve controls all of that. The Federal Reserve controls our monetary supply. So they don't actually do the printing of the money itself, but they tell the Treasury how much money it can actually print. The Federal Reserve is supposedly an independent agency from the United States government. So they have control over our monetary policy, and that means that they control how much money actually goes in circulation. In doing so, they can decide if inflation is going to go really high or if inflation can go really low. And the way that they do that is through their interest rates, and also they can print a lot of money and then take that money and spread it all throughout the country. They did this with quantitative easing on the New York Stock Exchange, printing trillions of dollars for that, and also they helped out the federal government in printing trillions of dollars for stimulus checks. Federal Reserve lowered their benchmark interest rates all the way down to 0% at the start of the pandemic. We had a slowing economy. There was a lot of Americans that were out of work, so they wanted a lot of money to circulate throughout the economy very easily, and one way to do that is to lower your interest rates. Now, Americans could have a lot more access to money, and they could go out and get a loan or spend on a credit card. At the end of the day, they're going to be spending a lot more money because they have the access and ability to do it. In addition, the Federal Reserve turned on the money printer. At the start of 2020, we had around $3 trillion in circulation, and today we have just over 20 trillion. So the M1 money supply for the Federal Reserve has increased exponentially over the last 2 or so years. And that means that there is a lot of money out there. Now, we immediately ran into a lot of problems when the Federal Reserve lowered their benchmark interest rates and started to print a lot of money. This made it so people could go out and spend money, and this was a time that was pretty unprecedented for our economy. We were facing a recession that we hadn't seen in a very long time and near depression-like scenarios. So our economy really wasn't on its own. It was being propped up by the Federal Reserve, and that allowed so many people to go out and spend a lot of money. We ran into supply chain issues because there's so much demand created by all of this money and lower interest rates. We also had lots of inflation because of that, and now inflation is at a near 40-year high. So that is kind of the situation that we're facing right now. We have really high inflation because of supply chain issues and all of this money that's been circulated in our economy pretty artificially. But at the same time, we have an economy that is starting to slowly recede into a recession. Like I said, the Federal Reserve and their monetary policy controls demand in the United States, so that goes both ways. They can either lower demand by raising their benchmark interest rates, or they can make demand go way up by lowering their interest rates. And it really just depends on the situation of the economy. If they want our economy to boom, well, they're going to lower their interest rates and they're going to print a lot of money. That means a lot of people can go out and spend, and naturally prices are going to go up, so profits are going to be huge for businesses and they can continue to grow. But you can't do that indefinitely, because then you're just going to have high inflation. You simply just need more and more money, because eventually people are going to run out of money, so they need more money, and the Federal Reserve has to print that. And of course, the Federal Reserve can restrict the economy by raising their interest rates. Now, with interest rates going up, millions of Americans can't go out and get a mortgage or an auto loan, and that's going to hurt our economy in the short term. Now, the Federal Reserve wants to bring down inflation. That's why we're talking about for their next FOMC meeting that they're going to continue to raise their benchmark interest rates. They want it to be really hard for Americans to go out and spend, and that is going going to affect a lot of different parts of our economy, not just everyday consumers. When the Federal Reserve raises their interest rates, well, that affects everything, like businesses. Businesses are not going to be able to go out and spend as much because they can't get as much capital and debt. There's not going to be as much business investment because that is very, very expensive in this economy. What that ultimately means is demand for everything is going to come down, because if these businesses can't grow, if they don't have as much capital and as much debt, well, then they're not going to be able to keep a lot of their employees, and they're not going to be able to hire new ones either. That could eventually mean that we see a lot of jobs lost in the United States, and it could mean that unemployment goes up too. That means for the Federal Reserve, their job is done. Demand is coming down in the United States, and they're sucking a lot of those dollars out of the economy. The problem is the Federal Reserve and Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell are not convinced that this is actually going to bring inflation down. Jerome Powell was recently before Congress, and he was asked by Senator Elizabeth Warren if raising their interest rates is going to have an effect on energy prices or if it's going to have an effect on food prices. He flat out said no. Those prices are most likely going to go up, but you're probably thinking, what gives? If the Federal Reserve is lowering demand and people don't have as much money to spend, then why are they raising their interest rates? Well, this is kind of a complicated situation. So like I said before, the Federal Reserve has control over our monetary policy, but they can only do so much. The only way to bring down inflation is for you to look at the root cause of inflation. Right now, it's because of a lot of the money that was printed over the last 2 years. They can't really do anything about that. That money is already out there, and the other problem is our supply chain issues. But they still need to raise their interest rates because that's really all they can do. They have to fight inflation in the only way that they can, through their monetary policy. But in doing so, that's going to bring down the mortgage market and the auto market and, like I said before, a lot of businesses. That creates a huge threat for our economy in a lot of other ways. So that could cause a lot of unemployment and jobs loss, and businesses could ultimately disappear. For the Federal Reserve, that means demand is going to come down, and possibly if Americans are unemployed and have no money, then they can't go out and get food and energy. Like I said, the Federal Reserve is doing everything that they can in order to try to lower inflation in our economy, but there's only so much they can do. So what that means is even though they're going to raise their interest rates, inflation might still be really high in the United States. And what we can expect from the Federal Reserve is for them to continue to raise their interest rates until there is just no money circulating throughout our economy in any sort of capacity. That's why you're starting to see a lot of CEOs and big banks say that the United States is going to be facing a recession within the next year or so. All of these businesses are going to have to lay people off, and we're already starting to see that right now in 2022. Now, chances are on the next Consumer Price Index or CPI report, we're going to see inflation come down. The CPI basically just takes a basket of all of our goods and services and shows if the price is going up or down on average in the United States. Chances are for July 2022, we're going to see inflation come down a little bit, and that's because energy prices have fallen in the United States for a lot of different reasons, particularly gas. But inflation is still a huge problem. Inflation isn't going away because a lot of that money is still out there and supply chain issues persist. Not only that, but lockdowns in China and the Russia and Ukraine war are causing a lot of other issues, making inflation go even higher. All of that is pretty much out of the Federal Reserve's hands, but what can they do? The only thing they can do is raise their interest rates. When the Federal Reserve does this though, well, that could potentially cause a recession. Now, this is a really interesting situation for the Federal Reserve and something that we need to keep an eye on as they continue to battle inflation in 2022. The Federal Reserve wants to bring down inflation. They want to continue to raise their interest rates, and I think they're going to do that throughout the rest of this year. But if we do see a recession and we do see a really long economic slowdown, well, the Federal Reserve may end up taking a look at inflation numbers, and if inflation comes down to say 6 or 5%, well, they might start stimulating the economy once again. That could mean that sometime in 2023, we could actually see the Federal Reserve reverse a lot of their monetary policies and actually go backwards, lowering their interest rates once again and flipping on that money printer. I don't think we're going to see that yet because the Federal Reserve needs to see some sort of inkling that the inflation problem is starting to disappear. But their goal in the United States is to get inflation down to 2%. 2%. They want to grow our economy, but they don't want our money to be completely devalued. The big question right now is, are they going to wait until inflation is down to that 2% mark, or are they going to take a small win and say that inflation is coming down, it's at 5 or 6%, so it's time to stimulate the economy and get us out of this recession? I don't have a crystal ball, so I can't tell you which scenario is going to happen first. It's really going to depend on if we actually are in a recession and how much inflation goes up or down over the coming months. But what I can tell you is this inflation problem is not going away anytime soon, and our economy at the moment is kind of in shambles. But now I want to hear from you on this issue. What do you think the Federal Reserve is going to do during their next FOMC meeting and their meetings in the future? Do you think they're going to raise interest rates even more aggressively, or do you think that they're going to actually lower them in July or later this year? Whatever your thoughts are, leave a comment below before you go. But that is it for today's business and financial news breakdown. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to stay up to date with all the top business and financial news from around the country, our team puts together a free daily newsletter, and you can subscribe to it by clicking the link in this corner right here. And if you want to stay up to date with me and everything else happening in the business and financial world, I'm putting out updates 7 days a week on this channel, and I've actually got another one ready for you right here, so be sure to check that out before you go. That is it for me, everybody. Be kind out there, and I'll see you all in the next one.